Good evening.
Good evening.
You are here with Courtside with Lawman,
And Carmen B.
and we are here to talk about criminal justice and issues that affect the public.
Yes,
We are
you go.
we are an educational and an informational program. We appreciate our viewers. We want you to be engaged. We want you to call in. We want you to post your comments and your questions in the chat.
An attorney-client relationship with myself or Carmen B.
But we do want you to be engaged, and we want to be able to answer those burning questions that you may have about a friend who's dealing with the criminal justice system, about a loved one who's dealing with the criminal justice system, about yourself if you're dealing with the criminal justice system. Now, if you need a private legal consultation, you can call my office at 916-443-5288, or you
Or
can
you can call me at 916-443-5600.
yes.
When we talk about our subject matter being criminal law, we mean practically any subject matter under criminal law. Anything that you may be curious about, anything that you see in the news and you want to talk about. So we'll try to talk about any subjects that you would like. But tonight, I think the subject matter is talking about a restraining order that was recently filed by several district attorney offices throughout the state of California. A restraining order is an order requested by the court in order to stop the action of someone, whether violence, whether it's a nuisance or something like that. Those are the typical restraining orders. But this restraining order was filed against the California Department of Corrections, the actual agency. Now, what's interesting about that, and I'll talk about the separation of powers and stuff, but we've got some news about that restraining order, and Carmen talk about what it was, what it did, and what happened today.
So, what CDCR was doing was increasing credits as part of their emergency regulations to reduce the size of the prison population.
Letting people
Because
out early.
we have known, though, for years that these prisons are severely overcrowded. There have been numerous suits by inmates about the mistreatment, about the maltreatment, about the um, ineffective medical care that
Exactly.
they're receiving, and about the overcrowding. Well, now we're in a pandemic, so those things are even more important. Because it's really difficult, if not basically impossible, to social
Yep.
distance in state prison because you don't have your own room. You are usually housed with other inmates. You may also be housed in an area that is like an open barracks area, which would be the equivalent of like having a gym and then just putting a bunch of bunk beds and cots in it right next to each other, not really 6 feet in between them. And it's a big, giant open room. So it is basically um,
The
uh,
air is shared by everyone.
by everyone. In fact, COVID-19 has to love that environment. And during the course of this pandemic, there have been numerous outbreaks of COVID-19 in the prisons. And so the CDCR was looking for a way to reduce the prison population. Now, unlike the district attorneys would have you believe, they were not opening up the floodgates and just opening up the gates and saying, everyone, you can go home. Murderers, rapers, killers, you can go home. That is not what was occurring at all. What they were saying was that there are people who are in prison who are serving time for a nonviolent offense, but they have a prior strike conviction in their past. Under the law, that person has to serve 80% of that sentence. And that is how it was for a substantial time period. It did not matter how old the strike prior was if that strike prior was being used to enhance their current sentence. The current sentence was not something that was violent, because if it was something that was violent, they would be serving 85% of the time. Well, when Prop 57 passed, what it did was it increased the credits. Um, or let me take that back. What they did when Prop 57 passed was CDCR increased the credits such that the person would be serving, instead of 80% of the sentence, they would only be serving 66%. So instead of receiving 20% good time, they would now be receiving the equivalent of about 33% good time. And you may think, well, that's not much of a difference, but it is to someone who has lost their liberty and who desires to get home to their family, to their support system if they have one. And the district attorneys, I believe there were about 28 of them in the state of California, sued or filed for this injunction to prevent CDCR from awarding these additional credits. And initially, that injunction was granted temporarily. I believe it was temporarily granted in December of 2021. Well, it appears, I believe it occurred late yesterday, that the Sacramento Superior Court judge
Well,
actually,
first, what happened? Tell them procedurally what had to happen was when the restraining order is granted or injunction is granted, then you have a right to appeal. And so apparently CDCR did appeal that action.
yes. And as a result, now there has been an order issued that actually dissolves that temporary injunction. So for the time period that that injunction was in place, CDCR could not give those additional credits to people who were in custody. They were prevented from doing so by the existence of that temporary injunction. Well, that injunction was dissolved last night, and therefore their rules regarding the additional credits can take effect. And she denied the district attorney's request to make that temporary injunction a permanent injunction. The judge agreed, one, with CDCR that the district attorneys did not have legal authority to even bring the action.
And I want to just mention something about separation of powers in the US government. We know that there are three large branches of government that are there from the Constitution as a check and balance so that government or any one institution doesn't go awry. We have the legislative branch that writes the law. We have the judicial branch that reviews the law. And we have the executive branch that enforces the law. Part of the executive branch would be the district attorneys and, unbelievably, CDCR. Now, so this is odd in that this is not one branch of government trying to stop another. It is a branch of government trying to stop something that's within them. So that's kind of odd, but beautifully, the judicial branch is the one who reviews this lawsuit. They reviewed it the first time, granted the injunction, but upon further review and upon appeal, they have now lifted that. And so that is exactly what the three branches are supposed to do: check and balance each other. And the judicial branch, the judges, the courts, are supposed to review laws and regulations and determine whether they're constitutional, whether they work or not, whether anyone has a valid suit, standing to sue. All issues go through the judicial branch. And as long as the judicial branch is applying the laws that are out there on the books now, then they have basically the final say in whether that law goes forward. So we're in a position now where the DAs tried to stop CDCR from doing what they wanted to do in order to be compliant with federal law. And now a judge, and I believe here in Sacramento, a local judge, actually has now lifted that. So we were going to talk a lot tonight about the impact of that and what to do as a result of that. But it appears that now credits may flow from CDCR that you would not necessarily get from the court itself. And so, Carm, if you want, yeah, you want
And
to take
so,
it?
under these regulations, again, the nonviolent, what are referred to as second strike offenders, would see an increase in the number of credits that they receive. And again, we have to explain that when we talk about second strike, it does not mean that this person has received a second strike conviction. It's kind of confusing the way the legal profession discusses it.
Right.
But a person who has one strike, because their time is doubled up, it's referred to as a second strike case. But the nonviolent offenders will not have a second strike.
Correct.
Um,
And
the,
as she said, the example of difference is, let's say I had a robbery 5 years ago and I served my time and I'm out now. I'm either on probation parole or I'm done with probation parole. If I pick up a car theft, if I pick up a grand theft, anything that can be called a felony vandalism, they can file that 211 as a prior conviction, which the three strikes law says it must be mandatory prison, as well as double what I can get for that vandalism, that theft, that car theft, any new felony, as long as that felony is not a serious and violent. So it means that people who had that robbery and you pick up one felony, you write a bad check for over $950 and pick up that as a felony, you're looking at, because of the bad check, you can get 3 years. You're looking at doubling that maximum of 6 years. And that has to do with the judge at sentencing being allowed to use that strike to double up. And that's what the law allows them to do. So, what we're talking about are credits, those individuals not serving all of that time. CDCR was saying, well, that's kind of harsh in a way, because it's sort of like how the three strikes law started.
well, CDCR also wants to be able to give people motivators for good behavior. People want to get home early. So if you give them options and things that they can do and participate that will give them additional credit for that good behavior, for that participation, they are going to do it. So it also benefits CDCR to having a better environment because people, despite being in prison, is and never having been there, but having spoke to many of people who have described it, it's not by any means a nice place, um, and you're overcrowded in there together. It's going to cause tempers to flare, right? It's going to cause problems. But if there are incentives for people to be able to come home early, then people are going to want to do those things. They're going to try and behave better so they can get back to their families. We must always remember these are not just inmates, these are human beings, these are citizens of this United States who have families, who have children, who have loved ones, who care about them.
And the bigger picture becomes the reasoning for incarceration in the first place is to punish. And that's why we call it a penal system. What we do with our penal system is the interesting part. California Department of Corrections used to be California Department of Corrections, but they threw in the R there, rehabilitation, and because they wanted to be seen as an organization that's trying to rehabilitate people. They're taking in so many people, but if you're spitting those same people out with no skills, with no dreams, no goals, then they'll be back again. And for a lot of people, that is what runs the prison industrial system. And a lot of people get a lot of money out of that. So if we were trying to repair souls, if we were trying to give people skills that they can use, then hopefully when they do get out, they could apply those skills to society. They can apply the things that they've learned to society and actually be better off because they have now learned something. They have now maybe turned a corner. Someone's given them a chance and they can be the productive citizen that they probably truly want to be. So our
And
theory of
again,
incarceration has to be looked at. And CDCR appears to be pointing in that direction, although forced, but yet they are doing so. Yeah, I'm sorry.
that's okay. Um, One of the things that the district attorney had argued was that the rules were put in place without the opportunity for the public to comment on that. But CDCR's response to that was the fact that Proposition 57 actually allowed CDCR to implement rules. And the people had already had their opportunity to comment when Prop 57 went into effect.
And I'm sure that they disagreed because the district attorney's offices throughout the state have disagreed with Prop 47, 64,
But not all. I
57.
would remind you, there were only,
Yeah,
I believe it was
28.
28.
And that's a majority, though, practically in
So
California.
there are still the other
DAs.
district attorneys who did not join in that.
Correct. Now, I will just say to that, though, that does not mean that they did not have the same heart as the others. They probably just did not join. So we don't know what they thought, but they are going to be governed by the decisions that come from the court. So they all are going to be subject to a court decision either way. But you were saying, Carm, about more about the decision itself and what it does.
Yes. So actually, the credits in which CDCR proposed, those credits will now and can now, as of I believe it was yesterday, late yesterday, can now actually be implemented. And again, we would remind you that this is not, it is not being applied to people who are convicted currently of violent crimes.
Correct. And serious and violent crimes. And for example, in the example that I said, I have simple felonies that you were charged with. Well, if you're charged with another robbery, now that's a little different now. You see, because that becomes the serious and violent offense. You still don't have three strikes, but your second strike is now serious and violent. And
And
those credits are the 15%.
and not meaning only 15% good time.
Correct.
Although once you actually get to prison, Prop 57 did increase the credit on that just slightly
Right.
so that it's 20% good time, serving 80% of the sentence.
Correct.
And someone may say, well, what is the reason for giving anyone good time at all? If they get a sentence, shouldn't they have to serve that entire sentence? One of the reasons, again, is to try and encourage people to uh, basically participate in that environment that they're going to have to live in for that time. And if you give them absolutely no incentives to engage in good behavior, then why should they? If I've been sentenced to 10 years and I have to serve the full 10 years, what incentive is there for me um, to behave while I'm here?
And
As a,
you know, and Carmen, for just a moment, let's just argue that point for a minute, okay? There are those, and I'll take the position that, well, you know what? If you get a 10-year sentence, that's what you owe to society. So I don't care if you want to get out. I don't care about that. I want you to serve every bit of that 10 years because that's what you deserve. And what do you say to that, Carmen?
Well, again, I would have to disagree with that. The person receives the sentence that they receive, but you are not going to be able to run a system like the prison system without giving people some incentive. And I'm not saying, I believe one of the district attorneys made a comment about, well, all they have to do is not stab someone in there. If you commit a crime while you are in prison, you can and most likely will be charged with that new crime. But we're talking about the day to day operations of the prison. Agreeing that, okay, they're feeding us breakfast at 5 a.m. I'm actually not going to protest that. I'm going to participate. That's now the time that I eat, right? Versus saying, you know what? They're not going to tell us when we can eat. If they want to serve us at 5 o'clock, nobody's going at 5 o'clock. And there's certainly many things that prisoners can do to disrupt the system. CDCR doesn't want that. Society doesn't want that. So that is one of the reasons that you give people incentives.
To keep the peace, is what you say.
That is it.
Now, what about the individuals who say then, well, you know what? That's not what prison is designed to do.
Well, we tell people, because we are a civilized society, we are the greatest nation on earth, that one of our purposes is rehabilitation. And it actually behooves all of society for people in prison to become rehabilitated, to be able to get out and be productive citizens so that they don't commit further crimes or victimize other people. And when I say victimize, I'm not necessarily talking about assaultive type crimes, but victimize in the theft of property. No one wants someone to steal property that belongs to them. If people are given the tools and the resources that they need to live productive lives, they will choose to do so. Now, you're always going to be able to find the example of, well, what about this particular person? There are plenty of people who are in custody who have mental health issues. And unfortunately, at some point, it seems like our society decided instead of treating people with mental health issues, we would warehouse them in prison. That does not serve us as a society at all, because if they're not getting treatment, they're not dealing with their mental health issues, they're not likely to be getting better, they're likely to be getting worse. And then when they are released, they are likely to reoffend. If we as a society want to prevent that recidivism, we need to do things um, that provides that support. And not everyone has a support system when they get out of prison. There are a lot of people in prison who grew up in the foster care system. They don't have parents to support them. They may not even know where their siblings are. They may have grew up apart from their siblings, them in one foster home and the siblings in another. So you have to examine someone's life, not just in comparison to what your life was, as, oh, I had both my parents and all of my siblings. And why doesn't that person just rely on that? Because there are a lot of people who don't have that.
And we got to look at our society with a micro, what do you call it? A magnifying glass in a lot of ways. There's the old sayings about, we're only as good as the least of us, and we're only as good as how we treat our people. And we can see that we're starting to get on the edge when it comes to how we treat the homeless, how we treat mentally ill individuals whose problems may or may not start with them, but most likely doesn't start with them. And we have an extremely competitive capitalist type of way of thinking that you've got to go out here and you've got to do this and you've got to do that. And if you don't and fall off, we don't care anymore. And so it creates a terrible rift. And we see it all the time when the arguments years ago about the 99 percenters, the 1%, there's poor people and people who starve here in America, which tends to be one of the most wealthiest nations around, even though our bank book may not show so. I think still.
Well, it does in California. We have a surplus.
But it's California. It's not the other 50, states. And so we got to care about it. If we are a union, we got to care about it on a whole. And, I mean, you can't just say part of the country. It's okay for part of the country to do okay, because there's good and bad in every state. There's low and high in every state. And we are leaving it. Sometimes the federal government leaves it to the states to deal with that problem. And the federal government steps away. And that may not be the best ideal, but people call that socialism, and then people run from it like it's a plague. But socialism will always be in our system.
Well, is it not
Socialist
socialism when we give kickbacks and funding to
corporations.
corporations,
Yeah.
and we do that all the time, and no one calls that welfare. But we have to, if we want to live together as a civilized society, we do have to care about the least among us. And right now, with the inflation where it is, housing prices are just absolutely skyrocketing. And you see now more homelessness than ever. There are people who are sleeping in tents and cars literally all around the city. And this isn't limited to Sacramento. This isn't limited to California. Um,
Yeah.
I'm seeing it, you know, all
Everywhere.
around the country,
Right.
everywhere. And as a society, we have to be willing to do something to help those who are in those unfortunate positions.
So I'm going to jump on the stand a little bit and go back to what I always stress, and that's we have to be aware citizens by voting. We have to be aware by knowing who we're voting for. And you've got to be active in that movement. All right now, what they're trying to do is pass voting restriction laws throughout the country. States have now taken up this goal or something of revamping voting rights. The one thing that no legislation should touch is voting rights. You should always make it easier to vote. We are the biggest democracy. It is built on the ability to vote. So how could we restrict voting rights anywhere if people don't see that that's a I'm trying to find the right word, but I guess bullshit is probably the best word. If they don't see that that's bullshit and it goes strikingly against what the nation has been designed to do, then we got a real problem. And we got this kind of a problem internally. And it just won't, it shows its ugly head at times, just like what we went through pretty much in the last 4 years. It shows its ugly head. And what we have to do is vote it away. And we tried to do that with Biden, but we've seen that if we don't control the Senate, then the Senate sits back and it will hold up things, just like they did during the Obama administration, trying to hold up all of his selections and orders and things like that. And so the country divided like that, rich, poor, white, black, whatever you want to put it, but when it's divided like that, I think that history is going to show that democracies will suffer more because the falling of a democracy is worse than being communist, worse than being socialist from the beginning. And people can debate on that and say, well, you're wrong. No, socialism is always bad. Communism is always bad. But the whole purpose, and I think Socrates, Aristotle used to talk about how government should begin with the greater good for the greater amount of people. So as long as you're striving for that, then that's what government should do. We're falling so far away from democratic principles and things like that. So please, as I stress all the time, get out, register to vote, and vote. Get your name on a registration, get it in so that at least you can be heard. And then educate yourself. Try to learn these things. I had a young man in the office the other day, and I'm asking him, tell me how many people live in Paraguay. And all he and I'm and but yet he stayed on his phone watching TikTok videos. And I said, all you have to do is take 5 seconds and ask your phone how many people live in Paraguay, and it will tell you that. And then you realize when I was young, I'd have to go out of the room I'm in, go to a library, pull out a book, possibly read how many people are in Paraguay. But you can do that from your phone right now. We have such power that we have, and it's in the hands of young people who aren't using it properly. They want to do a TikTok video, then learn a little bit about the voting process or taking that time that they are watching those videos in order to vote. Because the 15 and 20 minutes you might spend wasting on that could be time you stand your ass in the line in order to vote.
I will say that we don't mind the young people or anyone entertaining themselves, but what you must do is not be so entertained that you are distracted and not paying attention to what is happening around you.
I mind. I do. I'm sorry. It's hard to forgive sometimes because my problem is knowledge and power is at your hands, but you don't use it properly. And that's my problem with it is that we seem to be failing tremendously our children. And that how can we hand over the reins to the company to individuals who don't know how to run the company, who don't even care about running the company? And I may not live long enough to see the result of such things in the future, but if things don't turn now, and they can only turn with each and every one of us getting out and voting, doing what we can right now. It is a crisis now. The revolution is on. It's just, are you going to live it in a cage? Are you going to take a part-time role and do something. Anyway, okay, I'm off my box now. So, Carm, tell us
Yes.
more about the impact of this law. Let's
So,
conclude with going back to that.
yes. So, the credits, since the injunction was resolved, the additional time credits will be applied retroactively, for including that time period during which they were enjoined from being applied. So, if you have a loved one that is in prison, their credits are going to that is serving time on a non-violent um, uh, strike case, um, or not, let me repeat that, a non-violent case that is enhanced by a strike prior. Those additional credits will be applicable to them. And so CDCR will be recalculating those credits. So if you go to CDCR inmate locator, you can actually see the proposed dates. Now, I would imagine that they
They
have
have to be
not,
updated.
that
Yeah.
it's going to have to be updated. So the dates that you see in there today probably will change over the next few weeks as they are recalculating those credits. If you have someone that is in prison, start preparing for that person to come home. Um, have a place set up for them in your home where they can live. Um,
ID, getting
yes,
ID.
help them to get identification, because that is important to have to move around in this society. To get a driver's
Right.
license.
Check
Um,
the credit score.
yeah,
Just check and know
and
what it is.
and then help them with the job search.
Yeah.
Don't expect that just because they've come home, especially if they've been locked up for many years, that they just now miraculously, because you're out, you should know how to do everything.
Right.
Because remember, they've been away, and technology is changing so very fast. Things are probably very different from when they went in, if
Yep.
they've been in even 5 years.
Yeah. And the truth is, I mean, everywhere I go, I don't care where I stop, they're looking to hire. And it's kind of unbelievable that so many places are looking to hire.
And that's
It's
partially, I believe,
yeah.
because of the pandemic and the number of people that are getting sick with the pandemic. It does not have to be your lifetime career,
Right.
but you know,
But
as a
it's a
starting
job.
job,
Right.
yes, so that you can contribute something to the family that is supporting you, or just so that you can try and help take care of yourself.
Exactly. I mean,
All right.
I mean, it just brings up the fact. They were talking the other day about the Underground Railroad and a slave named Still, and how he was keeping records of people who would escape and stuff, and how dangerous that really was. But how, in that time, what slaves would do and what he would do is they would save their money in order to buy their freedom. They would work jobs left, right, and do everything necessary to buy their freedom, because that's what was everybody's goal: freedom. If we could just move north, if we can get out of here, we'll have freedom. And many were able to see that happen. And what it means is, if those people would work 2 or 3 jobs for their freedom, we got to think that way again.
That
For you,
means they're working the job that they work for free
that's
for the
right.
master.
And
And
anything
then
else they can give.
any other not
That's right.
really
Their
free
side
time, but
hustle, so
after
to
hour
speak.
times, anytime that he would
Yeah.
allow them to lease them out, and that was at less than pennies on the
Right.
dollar.
But
So the
so
point of that is, it's okay to work a job that you don't
yes,
like, to get yourself in a place where you want to be.
that's right.
I'm sure the
Patience.
lawman had jobs in his lifetime that he did not love, but he did them because it
That's
was,
right.
for the moment, that was the thing that he needed to do to get to the place that he wanted to be.
Right. And
And
Carmen too.
same, definitely.
So, even through going through law school, going through college, I've had to work the whole way.
And just want to, I know we've exceeded our time, but the community colleges, and I think we
Ah,
mentioned this before, have a program that's called Emerging Scholars,
scholars.
correct? For people who are getting out of prison or jail, and who are trying to great back into society,
Correct.
to get an education.
There are groups out here like All of Us or None, Our Daughters, community organizations that are trying to assist individuals get back on their feet again. Because 5 years is a long time, to lose from being in what we call society.
6 months is a long time. Three
Definitely.
months is a long time. Your life, if you're gone from your children, your job for a 90-day time period, that's going to have a serious impact.
Definitely. Okay.
All right. We have concluded another evening here at Courtside with Lawman.
And Carmen B.
Again, we are here every Friday at 6 p.m. We're available to answer your questions if you have them.
And we appreciate you listening to us.
We do.
And we ask that you spread the word, spread the news about we're here, and we're here to talk about serious issues that affect us in society, especially the criminal justice system.
All right.
So,
Thank you, and have a good evening.
so long, everyone. Bingo.